What if I told you the woman you're thinking about wants you? Not maybe, not kinda. She wants you, but she's too afraid to show it, too afraid to want too much. Not because you're not enough, but because you just might be more than she can handle emotionally. That craving, it leaks in her voice, her body, the way she acts weirdly normal around you, and you're missing it. She doesn't text first, not because she's uninterested, but because wanting you openly would expose how deeply she feels. That's not rejection, that's restraint. And if you don't understand it, you'll lose women who were already yours emotionally. Pay attention. You're about to learn what no school, no book, no casual podcast ever told you. The signs aren't loud. They're in the quiet. They're in how she holds herself back. And if you keep ignoring them, you'll keep watching other men end up with women who were craving you the whole time. Comment this: I attract, not chase. If you're ready to uncover what most men never see, you've been lied to about women, about dating, about how attraction works. And yes, this video is about you. Because if you're listening, you're tired of being in the dark, tired of guessing, tired of not knowing if she's just being nice, or if she's emotionally tangled in you and trying not to show it. That's why I'm putting together the most powerful resource ever created for men. The Stoic Relationship Blueprint, an honest, raw, practical guide backed up by timeless Stoic wisdom that will show you not just how to interpret women, but how to become the one she never forgets. It drops in a few days. Look forward to it. Your life is about to shift. Modern men are trapped in a cycle. We chase the obvious signs, the emoji responses, the playful teasing, the late-night calls. But real female desire, it doesn't always announce itself. In fact, most of the time, it hides. Women fear being too obvious because the world punishes them for wanting too much. So they pull back, play it cool, pretend it's nothing. And you think it really is nothing, but it's not. She's craving you. And the men who know how to see these 4 signs, they don't beg, they don't chase, they don't even try to convince her. They simply recognize her emotional signals and become the man who doesn't need to be told he's wanted. Number 1. She gets uncomfortable around you. When a woman starts acting differently around you, not rudely, not coldly, but with a certain kind of restraint that shows in her breath, the slight pauses in her flow, the tension behind the words she's trying to keep light. What you're witnessing is not confusion, but a war between what she feels and what she fears it will cost to admit those feelings, because no matter how independent or composed she may appear, when you activate something in her that forces her to feel more deeply than she's ready to express, her internal world doesn't stay still. It tightens, it prepares, it guards, and instead of opening up, she often holds back, not because she's uninterested, but because she's afraid that if she allows that feeling to surface without certainty, she'll lose control of a dynamic she's been trained to manage from a distance. And that fear, that very tension you see in her slightly rigid posture, the quick shift in her tone when you look at her a second too long, or the half smile she forces when she can't decide whether to lean in or retreat. That is the proof of your emotional impact, and here's the problem. Most men don't see this. They interpret discomfort as rejection because no one ever taught them that discomfort in the presence of someone you desire but don't fully trust yet isn't a sign to back off. It's a sign to remain solid. And when a woman is in your space and her usual rhythm breaks, when she touches her hair 3 times in 2 minutes, when she starts checking her surroundings like she's unsure of how she's being perceived while in your presence, or even when she laughs too quickly at something that wasn't remotely funny just to fill the space she's unsure how to hold, what you're watching is her navigating emotional exposure. And the more calmly you respond to it by staying grounded, by speaking slowly, by not adjusting your energy to make her more comfortable, the more she begins to sense something in you that almost no man gives her: emotional leadership. And leadership in this context doesn't mean dominance or control. It means you are unshaken by her unpredictability, you are unmoved by her social mask, and that gives her the rare experience of feeling emotionally safe without being told to feel that way, because the truth is this: a woman doesn't need a man to calm her down when she's nervous if she can sense that his presence is rooted in self-control. And the Stoics understood this long before dating became a game of tactics and text messages. They taught that the best way to influence others is not through persuasion, but through embodiment. And when a woman walks away from an interaction with you feeling emotionally stirred, not because of what you said, but because you created a space where she couldn't maintain the emotional detachment she's used to, she will think about you, not in a casual way, but in a deep, reflective way, wondering why she couldn't keep it together. And if she's still in your presence the next time, you'll likely see a new variation of that same emotional turbulence, and your job isn't to analyze it aloud. It's to stay exactly as you were, focused, still, the observant, and calmly dominant in your presence. Because when she realizes she doesn't need to hide, and that you're not trying to decode her every move, but simply witnessing her truth without judgment, she will begin to open up. And opening up in this context is not dramatic confession or verbal vulnerability. It's small, layered shifts like longer eye contact, deeper questions, less filler conversation, and a genuine curiosity about who you are outside of what you project. And that's how trust begins. Not in grand gestures, but in the emotional permission you offer when you don't flinch at her defenses. And think about this practically. The last time you noticed a woman stumble through a sentence around you, or suddenly become more self-aware, or visibly change her posture when you leaned closer, did you brush it off? Or did you observe it as a window into something unspoken? Because most men are trained to chase what's loud and miss what's real. And if you're not careful, you'll spend years thinking women weren't interested, when in fact they were overwhelmed by how much they were. And this is why your self-mastery becomes your greatest tool. Because the man who knows his value never needs to ask for signs. He sees them in the shifts, and he knows how to navigate those shifts without leaning too far in or pulling too far back. And now here's what makes this even more powerful. When you remain emotionally poised during those uncomfortable interactions, you show her something she rarely sees: a man who is more tuned in to his inner compass than her reactions, and that makes you the rarest man in her world, because everyone else is trying to interpret her every move, trying to adjust their behavior based on how she responds. And in doing so, they lose the very frame she was hoping would anchor her uncertainty. So don't be like them. Don't try to make her laugh to ease the moment. Don't fidget when she gets quiet. Don't chase after the comfort of confirmation. Instead, let the tension exist. Let her awkwardness exist. Let her uncertainty breathe, and stand in the presence of it all with calm eyes and steady breath. Because the emotional experience she gets from being around a man who doesn't demand clarity, who doesn't push for closure, who doesn't flinch when her composure cracks, that is the man she will respect, remember, and emotionally revolve around even when you're not in the room. And what's critical to understand here is that this level of influence is not built through effort. It's built through embodiment. Which means, if you want to have this kind of impact, you must stop chasing emotional reassurance and start cultivating internal stability. You must start asking yourself, do I know who I am when someone else's emotional state is uncertain? Can I remain grounded when her energy fluctuates without making it about me? And if the answer is no, that's your work. Because once you learn how to remain centered when others are reactive, once you realize that your job is not to interpret but to witness, not to respond but to remain, you begin to carry a weight that cannot be ignored. And that weight, That calm intensity is what stirs women on a level they don't fully understand. And in a world where most men either emotionally collapse or overreact in the face of female confusion, you will become the rare presence who simply allows, and that allowance is what sets you apart, because in that space she learns something about herself, something about you, and something about what it means to be with a man who doesn't need to decode her to see her. And the truth is, you don't need to be extraordinary to create this kind of impact. You need to be emotionally still, psychologically clear, and spiritually unbothered, because discomfort in others is often a reflection of depth in you. And when you live from that place of rooted presence, women will come into your life not because you chased them down or proved yourself, but because the version of themselves they feel rise in your presence is a version they don't experience anywhere else. And that's when you realize the ultimate truth. You never needed to convince her. You only needed to be the kind of man she couldn't stay composed around without wondering what that reaction meant. Number 2, she mirrors your habits. The most overlooked proof of emotional connection between a woman and a man is not found in her compliments or declarations. It's discovered in how she begins to subtly shape her world around the presence and influence of yours, not as an act of imitation, but because her internal compass begins adjusting without her even realizing it. And what's profound about this is that when a woman starts adopting the expressions you often use, when her vocabulary suddenly expands to include phrases that come from your world, when her tone aligns with yours, or when her interests unexpectedly drift toward what you casually talked about. This is not small talk reappearing. This is emotional absorption unfolding in real time, and the reason most men miss this is because they're too focused on what she says to notice how she's changing beneath it. So let me take you into that space, the space where emotional influence is neither announced nor asked for, but expressed through the unconscious synchronization of habits. And to bring this to life, think of a time you were sharing a conversation with someone, and days later they started picking up on your tone, quoting your ideas, or referencing concepts you introduced as if they were always part of their world. Now imagine that happening from a woman you find deeply interesting, and instead of calling it out or getting flattered, you realize what it means. Her emotional mind is inviting yours to lead, and that is what most never get taught. Real attraction is rarely performed through words, but demonstrated through alignment. And when a woman emotionally aligns, she doesn't just hear you. She begins to feel you inside her environment, which changes how she behaves, what she listens to, what she watches, what thoughts cross her mind when she's alone. And this is where most men collapse. They don't understand that when a woman subtly starts adapting your influence, it's not for manipulation or flattery. It's because your energy made her curious enough to internalize it and experiment with it inside her emotional world. And that right there is one of the strongest signals of attraction that's quietly concealed behind what most think is just coincidence. And now the question becomes, why does this matter to you? And how should you respond to it if your goal is to deepen the connection and stay rooted in self-respect? First, understand the ancient Stoic concept that says, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. This is the foundation, because when you become the man who lives his philosophy, stands on clarity, and operates from principle, your habits become magnetic without needing attention. And it's this grounded expression of self that causes the right woman to naturally begin absorbing your way of being, not out of neediness, but out of resonance. And here's where the path splits. The weak man gets excited when a woman starts acting like him. He thinks he's being admired, but he fails to see that admiration without awareness leads to arrogance. So the strong man, the wise man, he notices it, he respects it, but he does not become intoxicated by it. Instead, he quietly honors the shift and continues building his character so that the energy she's syncing with remains rooted in value. And now let's move to the practical. If you notice a woman speaking more like you, laughing at things you enjoy, repeating expressions you use, or asking about books or shows you casually referenced, do not say, "You're copying me," or make it about your ego. Instead, deepen your value delivery. Introduce higher conversations, share sharper insights, maintain your emotional tone, and let her expansion continue at her own pace. Because when a woman adopts part of your behavioral language, what she's really doing is emotionally practicing being in your world, and the more you flood that world with depth, integrity, presence, and internal clarity, the more her subconscious will link emotional safety and inspiration to your presence, and that's when you stop being just another guy she's talking to and start becoming the man her emotional system is trying to figure out how to keep around without losing her pride. But that only happens if you understand the difference between influence and control. Control wants to force outcomes, influence elevates environments, and Stoicism teaches us this. He who conquers himself is the mightiest warrior, which means your mission is not to get her to copy you. Your mission is to master yourself so consistently that the energy you bring becomes impossible to ignore. And if that happens, you'll notice women begin to change. Not because you told them to, but because your presence reminds them of who they want to become. And now let's explore. Another example. Imagine you've been practicing daily journaling, staying consistent with your fitness, speaking with clarity, setting boundaries with grace. And then a woman you've been loosely seeing starts asking about your gym schedule, starts writing more, starts avoiding gossip, starts listening more and reacting less. That's not just coincidence, that's subconscious invitation. She's drawn to how your standards challenge her comfort zone. And instead of confronting you, she changes herself to keep up with the energy you represent. And now here's your choice. Either you dilute your standard to match her pace, or you hold your standard and become the mirror that makes her see what she's capable of. And the latter is what a real man does, because women don't stay with men who give them attention. They stay with men who remind them of their own greatness without having to preach it. And to become that man, you must first cultivate inner congruence, which means no contradictions in your message, your routine, your words, or your energy. And when that congruence is established, your emotional weight in her world increases, and from there, all influence becomes effortless. She adjusts not because you're impressive, but because you're consistent. And consistency in today's world is a superpower because most men are just reaction machines. They change tone when they're ignored, shift personality to impress, and abandon their philosophy just to be liked. But not you, because you understand that a man's worth is no greater than his ambitions. And when your ambition is to create an environment that naturally raises the emotional standard, then the women who align with that will slowly begin shaping themselves without even knowing why. So next time you notice a woman adapting to your patterns, whether it's in conversation, mood, expression, or habits, let that be your signal not to react, but to refine yourself even further, because the moment you get intoxicated by her attention is the moment you risk corrupting the very energy that drew her in. Instead, stay calm, stay committed, stay refined, and if she continues adjusting, you'll know it's not an accident, it's not a game, it's her emotional way of saying, "I want more of this," without ever needing to say it aloud. And that is the level of awareness that separates men who date women from men who transform women just by being who they are without ever trying to convince them. Number 3. She tries to friendzone you first. When a woman says she just wants to be friends, but her energy keeps looping back to you, when she claims you're like a brother, yet texts you late at night, asks your opinion about her emotional chaos, gets a little too affected by the idea of you dating someone else, or suddenly becomes emotionally unavailable the moment you suggest detaching. What you're witnessing is not a woman drawing a boundary out of clarity. It's a woman trying to maintain proximity without the vulnerability of exposure. And the mistake that most men make in this moment is taking the words at face value while completely missing the emotional contradiction beneath them. Because the truth is, sometimes the friend zone isn't a rejection. It's a decoy. It's a cover to manage her emotional fear while keeping you close enough to still feel the emotional presence you provide. And the reason she does this isn't because she wants to manipulate or hurt you. It's because you represent something deeper than her emotional history knows how to receive. You awaken something in her that frightens her, not because it's negative, but because it's unfamiliar. Because you're not trying to impress her with charm or flash. You're just being consistent, grounded, decisive. And that throws off the patterns she's used to controlling. And when a woman isn't ready to deal with what you evoke inside her, she will often label you in ways that keep her safe from her own vulnerability. And that's when you hear the "just friends" line, not because she doesn't feel something, but because she's not ready for what feeling something might mean for her emotional structure. So what does a man do in this situation if he wants to maintain his dignity, stay in his power, and not fall into the trap of hoping for a reversal that may never come? He becomes emotionally intelligent enough to realize that language is only part of the equation, that tone, behavior, and consistency are louder than labels. And instead of arguing the point or trying to escape the zone she's trying to place him in, he simply holds his frame, steps back internally, and begins to observe rather than invest. Because what most men don't understand is that a woman will test your emotional self-respect long before she ever tests your physical dominance. She wants to know if you can still stay centered when your value isn't immediately recognized. And the moment you beg for clarity or try to shift her perception of you with persuasion, you lose the very power that made her conflicted about you in the first place. And if you've ever been in that dynamic where she gives you the emotional intimacy of a partner but the verbal boundary of a sibling, you know how mentally exhausting and spiritually draining it can become. And that's why your strategy has to shift from decoding her to deepening you. Because the more grounded you become, the clearer it becomes to you who actually belongs in your emotional space and who is just orbiting because they aren't brave enough to say what they really feel. And the Stoics taught that he who is brave is free. And in this context, bravery means choosing your emotional freedom over temporary closeness that comes with confusion. So the man who understands this stops chasing closure and starts building clarity, not for her, but for himself, because he knows that the version of himself that tolerates emotional inconsistency is not the version that builds a legendary life. And let's get specific. Imagine a woman tells you she wants to be friends, but she still texts you every morning, still reaches out when she's having a bad day, still gets visibly uncomfortable when you mention other women, still wants your presence in her life. Is that friendship? Or is it a woman who's emotionally involved, but afraid of what your presence might require her to become? And here's what separates you from the average man. You don't punish her for the fear, but you also don't participate in the illusion. You hold space without abandoning your standard, and you let her experience the emotional difference between a man who needs approval and a man who stands in truth regardless of how she frames the connection. And if you do this right, one of two things will happen. She will either rise to meet you in emotional honesty, or she will retreat into comfort and watch from afar. But either way, you maintain your integrity and avoid the emotional trap of confusing presence with progress, because just because she's around doesn't mean she's with you, and just because she says "friend" doesn't mean she doesn't feel more. It just means she's labeling you based on what she can handle, not based on what's real. And that's why you must start interpreting situations through action, consistency, tone, and energy. Not just words. And when you become the man who does this, you no longer get stuck waiting for a label to change. You focus on becoming a man whose standard makes people either rise to meet him or remove themselves. And that's when you become dangerous in the best way possible. Not because you chase or convince, but because your presence alone creates clarity. And the woman who tries to box you into friendship while still seeking your presence will eventually have to confront her own contradiction. Because the longer you remain grounded and unattached, the more obvious it becomes that she's not confused about you. She's confused about whether she's ready to meet a man who doesn't wait for clarity to define himself. And the reason this hits so hard is because we've all been there, giving more than what was received, hoping for change, trying to prove worth. And each time we betrayed ourselves in those dynamics, we lost a piece of our edge. And it's time to take it back by no longer engaging with relationships that require you to diminish your value in order to stay close. So next time you feel you're being friend-zoned while still being emotionally leaned on, ask yourself this: what am I giving that she's unwilling to give back? And once you see that imbalance, you don't complain, you don't argue, you simply start shifting your energy inward. And when she notices the emotional withdrawal, not in anger, not in silence, but in calm detachment, she will either speak the truth she's been hiding or fade. And both are victories if you've mastered the art of emotional freedom, because the man who doesn't need to be loved at the cost of his self-respect is the man who is most loved over time, not for his charm, but for his clarity. And in a world where women constantly test boundaries to feel safe, your consistency is the anchor they never forget, not because you tolerated confusion, but because you represented what they were too afraid to ask for directly. A man who knows himself so well, he doesn't allow access without emotional honesty. Number 4, she asks indirect questions. When a woman begins asking questions that sound casual but feel loaded with subtext, when she makes curious statements like, "You must have a lot of girls chasing you," or "I bet you say that to all the girls," or she pretends to joke about your dating life while watching closely for your reaction, she's not gathering data for fun. She's investigating emotionally without exposing herself, because for many women, directly stating attraction or emotional interest feels too vulnerable, too risky, too irreversible, especially in a world where attention is currency and vulnerability can be used as leverage. So instead of confronting her own desire head-on, she tests for emotional footing. She prods for clues that might affirm or warn her without the cost of full exposure. And this is not manipulation. This is emotional intelligence being used defensively, because when she starts asking questions that don't align with the surface context, like, "Do you always talk like this?" or "What are you looking for right now?" especially early on or outside of deep relational context, what she's really doing is assessing where she stands, how she should feel, what you might expect, and whether or not she's safe to express more. And if you don't understand this, you might brush her off or answer casually, not realizing that she's not listening to your words, but measuring your essence. So let's get specific. Imagine you're having a calm conversation about weekend plans, and out of nowhere she says, "I bet you say that to all the girls," not because she's trying to accuse you, but because she's emotionally anxious about being seen as just another option. That's not sarcasm, that's her heart camouflaging a fear. And how you respond in that moment determines whether she leans in emotionally or pulls back behind composure. And if you get defensive or overly agreeable, you fail the test, because she's not looking for reassurance. She's looking for congruence. She wants to see if your reaction is steady, if your eyes stay calm, if your words match your presence, because her questions are not puzzles to solve. They're openings to deepen trust. And Stoicism teaches us to be aware of the space between stimulus and response, that in that space lies our power. And this is exactly where you apply that principle, not by explaining yourself, not by defending your intentions, but by remaining rooted in who you are, regardless of what she says. Because when a woman asks these questions, she is not just trying to learn about your dating habits. She's trying to understand what her own attraction to you means. And the more stable and authentic your response, the more emotional ground she gains to explore that attraction with less fear. And now consider another scenario. She asks you, "What type of girls do you usually go for?" Or, "Would you ever date someone like me?" On the surface, it sounds like curiosity, but underneath, it's an emotional fishing line cast out to see if she's safe in your eyes without risking the pain of direct rejection. And when you recognize that the question is an emotional risk disguised as casual chatter, you realize that your answer is not about information. It's about energy, because she's not looking for reassurance, she's looking for resonance. She wants to feel that you're aware enough to see beneath her words, calm enough not to overreact, and solid enough to maintain clarity when her questions carry hidden edges. And if you answer with desperation to be liked or with dismissive sarcasm to defend your image, what she sees is a man who lacks self-awareness or emotional steadiness. But if you meet her inquiry with grounded presence, with a smirk that says, "I know what you're doing, and I'm not rattled," followed by a thoughtful or playful answer that doesn't expose need or arrogance, you subtly pass her test without even naming it, and the test is always the same. Are you rooted enough in who you are to handle the weight of who she's still figuring out how to be? And this is where the deeper layers of attraction unfold, not in performance or appearance, but in response to pressure that's unspoken, because the indirect question is never about the surface topic. It's about emotional congruence, and the men who don't know this live their lives reacting to questions without realizing they're constantly revealing their frame. And this is where Stoicism becomes your greatest ally, because Stoicism doesn't mean emotionless. It means being guided by principle rather than impulse. And the principle here is this: never answer the question she's asking. Answer the question she's feeling. And if that sounds abstract, here's how you live it. When she asks, "Are you seeing anyone?" and she says it mid-laugh, mid-sentence, or disguised as curiosity, don't just blurt out your dating status. Feel the emotional intention. Is she jealous, unsure, nervous, or testing your reaction? And then decide if your answer reinforces your frame or bends to her projection, because if you're truly present, you'll hear her feelings before her phrasing. And once you train yourself to sense this emotional language beneath the verbal one, you'll realize that attraction has very little to do with what is said and everything to do with how you make her feel while it's being said. So practice this. Every time a woman asks you a question that feels oddly placed or emotionally charged, pause. Not to calculate, but to calibrate, and ask yourself, what would a grounded man answer if he had nothing to prove, nothing to hide, and nothing to chase? And that answer will always carry more power than any witty comeback, because it reflects your self-command. And a woman will always trust the man who answers from wholeness more than the man who answers from hunger. So when she asks about your past, your preferences, your intentions, even if she does it lightly or with humor, see it as a window, not a trap, and let that window show her that while others needed to impress or deflect, you remain steady, because steadiness in the face of subtle emotional pressure is what gives you presence. And presence is what makes you unforgettable, not because you're trying to be, but because she doesn't find that depth anywhere else. And let's go deeper. The woman who craves you but doesn't want to admit it yet will ask questions that sound unrelated but are emotionally precise. She'll ask about your views on love, about what you think of certain types of women. She'll tease you with hypotheticals. She'll talk about a friend who has a crush just to see what you'd say. And if you're too literal, you'll miss the entire communication. And this is why the emotionally intelligent man becomes rare. He doesn't just listen to respond, He listens to reveal what's underneath. And that's what builds emotional connection that transcends charm, because he's not rushing to win the moment. He's waiting to read the soul, and women feel this in their nervous laughter, in the way they hesitate before asking the next thing, in how they lean in even when they say they're just curious, because part of them is hoping you'll read the real story behind the line, and if you do, without exposing it or mocking it, she'll feel safe enough to let down the emotional armor she's built over years of shallow responses from shallow men. And in that moment, you don't need a script or a tactic. You just need presence. And presence is built by detaching from outcome while staying engaged in reality. And the Stoics said that clarity is found not in withdrawal from the world, but in being in the world without becoming it. So when she asks something that seems strange or out of place, don't try to fix the question. Meet the intention with a stronger foundation than she expected. And when she sees that your emotional world isn't easily shaken by curiosity disguised as comedy, she'll stop questioning who you are and start questioning why she feels so understood by someone she hasn't even confessed her truth to yet. And that's the power of mastering this sign. It's not about decoding her questions like a puzzle. It's about becoming the kind of man whose responses make the questions irrelevant because his presence speaks the very answer she's afraid to ask directly. And this is the reason most men lose connection before they ever get clarity, because they answer what she says instead of sensing what she means. They speak for approval instead of anchoring truth. And if you felt the sting of being close to her emotionally, yet always one step away from honesty, if you've ever been on the receiving end of questions that weren't really questions, just veiled hopes disguised as jokes, or careful curiosity wrapped in sarcasm, and you walked away not knowing what just happened, wondering if you missed something, it's because no one ever taught you the language behind the language. And that's why this next part matters more than anything. The truth is, society hasn't prepared you for this. It's built to confuse you, distract you, weaken your instincts, and turn your masculinity into either an apology or a weapon, never a foundation. You've been told to be nice, soft, available, flexible, and now you're drowning in confusion, failing tests you didn't know existed, losing women who felt something but never said it because you didn't know how to interpret what wasn't spelled out. You're not broken. You're not unworthy. You were simply untrained. That's why I've created something deeper than a video, deeper than advice, a complete transformation tool, the Stoic Relationship Blueprint, a timeless, tactical, brutally honest guide designed to arm men like you with the clarity you've been denied. No fluff, no theory, just raw, usable, bulletproof strategies that show you how to master yourself and your relationships with depth, discipline, and emotional intelligence. This is the manual we should have all been handed the moment we became men. It's dropping in just a few days. But this isn't for everyone. We're capping the number of sales to just a few, because those who get this knowledge must be men who are ready to act, ready to evolve, ready to carry this power responsibly. After that, the doors close. No exceptions, no extensions. If you've ever been ghosted and didn't know why, if you've ever tried to be the good guy and ended up ignored, if you've ever felt that sick emptiness when she chose someone else and you don't even know what you did wrong, if you're tired of feeling like something is missing and you're craving control, certainty, and deep emotional power, this book is for you. And when you get your hands on it, your life will never be the same again. So if you're serious about transforming your relationships, mastering your frame, becoming the man who doesn't just attract, but commands presence, respect, and emotional loyalty, drop a comment right now. Blueprint. Let me know you're ready, and make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss another life-changing insight.